In this episode, we are going to be talking about the Italian classic film from 1954, Senso, which was written by Luchino Visconti. He also adapted the screenplay from the book, and it starred Farley, Granger, and Alida, Valli. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a video podcast where I explore how stories are told in movies from all over the world. My guest today is Joanne Stephen, who is an actress, a Canadian actress. And for those of you who may or may not know, I've been an actor and an acting teacher for a while, and Joanne has actually been in my class for quite a while, and she's a film enthusiast herself. So I welcomed her on. So Joanne, welcome. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. This should be fun.
Yes, no, I'm sure it will be because I love Visconti, and I know before we started recording, you checked out like The Damned, which is a very dark and heavy movie,
Yes.
I've come to appreciate him more and more over the years as probably one of the finest filmmakers in Italy, and just a really fascinating life as well. But
hmm
looking at Senso, we're both going into this blind because I actually hadn't seen it either, and I know you hadn't. So this is great that we both are coming in at it fresh. So just generally speaking, how did you feel about it?
Well, my very first kind of impression was, wow, this is so melodramatic.
Yeah, yeah,
Just,
yeah.
I mean, right from the get-go, of course, it starts with an opera, which I didn't recognize right away. I actually have seen quite a few operas, but I've never seen Il Trovatore.
Yeah.
But I later discovered that's what it was. So it starts off with this opera, and I thought, oh, is this like an opera? Is this film an opera? And then I realized, as it pans to the audience, I realized, oh, okay, all right, the characters are watching the opera, and then the film unfolds. But it's as if the whole film is actually an
Yeah,
opera. It's very
absolutely.
operatic in its
Absolutely.
feeling, and yeah, very melodramatic. Long scenes where there's just lots of emotion being expressed between the characters, very sweeping gestures, um, dramatic behavior, and a real strong
Oh yeah.
romanticism through the whole film. People just living on their emotions, not really
Oh yeah.
thinking that logically, just living, doing unconventional things because their heart tells them to, so
Yes.
very romantic. So yeah, those were my initial impressions, but the melodrama took me aback a little bit because I think in our current time we're not used to
Mm.
that style of acting or of directing.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. And Visconti himself, uh, to this day, apparently is still considered one of the best opera directors. He was also an
Yes.
opera
hmm
director. You can certainly see that in his filmmaking. And if you
hmm
look at his early films, he was basically like a neorealist, very much like De Sica and Rossellini. But then he evolved and was combining opera within his films, and it's down to the music. I mean, he has Verdi in there, and
hmm
that one moment where the Countess decides to give Farley Granger the money he's asking, and she goes, "Wait, wait!" She goes and gets it, and just this music comes on, this Verdi, and it's so you don't see anyone do that anymore. I mean, it's. I mean, you would see it in the States, but not even that. Not even to that extent.
hmm
When films were heavily scored, even in Hollywood at a certain point. But yeah, it's quite breathtaking, and I like that you put it as melodrama because it is so heightened, and it's so emotional. And you're right
hmm
in the sense that the characters are totally going on, particularly the Countess, played by Alida Valli. she's so much going on her feelings, and I
Hmm.
really thought it was like just this obsession that she has with this guy Franz, like sexually obsessed with him. Because what's interesting is that you think it's a love story at first, but then it occurs to me, what okay, she doesn't really know much about him, and she very quickly is, not that people don't fall for each other quickly, but they're meeting in secret. She's cheating on her
Mm.
husband.
Yes.
Her husband's like an elderly person. She's part of this royal family in Italy, and I get the impression she was perhaps not happy in her own life, and she met this man, and it just gets it gets the better of her. But I think that she really was just aroused by the secrets and the fooling around and the
Hmm.
drama in that.
Hmm.
'Cause I really thought it was, and it's from her point of view, so I
Yes.
thought it really was about her, and just totally her emotions getting the best of her. I mean, was that your experience?
Yes, very much so. I mean, like I was thinking about, the times that that this is around 1860 or so
Yeah,
when the unification of Italy was occurring. And I mean, I mean, women didn't have a lot of agency.
right.
And we don't know any of her backstory. Like, did she, in the story, she's a noblewoman, she's a countess, but was she always of that class? Maybe she married up because she married an older man,
Yeah, it's hard to say.
which, yeah, which would have given her stability, but it clearly, as shown in the film, was not a love match because even I think it was in one of the first scenes, she basically says, I'm going to do what I want. Like, you can't
Yeah,
tell me what to do.
right.
And he just kind of lets her have her way pretty much. So it's
and
clearly
she
not
and
a
she
love
even
match.
was different, but like politically, like she was for Italy unifying, and
Yes,
he didn't care. Like he was hanging out with the Austrian soldiers, and he was just, to him
that's
it didn't
right.
matter, but to her it did.
Yes, because her cousin was one of the main kind of organizers and leaders
Right, right.
in the independent in the unification movement. So yeah, so I had to think about her situation in terms of what were women's lives like then. So she's in this kind of loveless marriage. It didn't appear that they had children, so she didn't have
Yeah,
any
right.
ties. So, and then there's this very attractive Austrian officer who's a major player.
Yeah.
Like he's got serious game because he's got all the women in Venice, you know, uh, involved with him, but she can't help but kind of fall in love with him. And I
Yeah.
think you're right. It's basically a sexual attraction. It's a chance for some excitement. She was drawn to this idea of a fantasy life with this dashing Austrian officer. But I mean, as we find out in the film, I mean, he's just a player,
Right.
and
Yeah.
he's using her.
Did you suspect he was playing her or did it come as a shock when he finally tells her he was using her?
You know what? So I ended up watching it twice. So I watched the first time I watched it. It actually was a little bit of a surprise. I think I missed because there was so much melodrama going on. I think I missed some of the cues, like his expressions. Farley Granger was really good in this role. I think
Really good. Yeah.
he showed a lot of subtle transition. Like the first part, he's the dashing, young gentleman, and then, he slowly kind of transforms into a real player. And at the end, of course, he's very debauched and degenerate and so on. But I think I missed a lot of that, the subtle shifts the first time I saw it. And then when I
Yeah.
rewatched it, I was able to pick up a lot more on his expressions and the way he'd say something and then he'd kind of look at Livy out of the side of his eyes like, is she buying this? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. That's the
yeah.
that's the beauty of a really good film, that it offers so much more with each viewing. It's not just, one and done.
Yes.
There's so much, there's a lot of ambiguity in this film. Like, as you said, we don't know her backstory. So we have to imagine
Mm-hmm.
why she's going down this road. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you're right. You'll pick up on more of his side of things, because you don't really know how much of a calculated plan this was, or if he
Right.
had some kind of feelings, because it's all from her point of view, and it's also, she's also narrating the story, so it's very much her
Yes.
her story. So we never see him alone with his thoughts, we only see her alone with her thoughts. The only
Right.
time I suspected it was possible that I was like, because when he didn't see her for a while, and then she
Right.
came over to find him with where he was staying with all the other soldiers, and they were all laughing at her and saying, "Oh, he's a
Yes.
womanizer. He's had, and it didn't dawn on me that they perhaps were telling the truth. I thought maybe they were just being, jerks, because she was a cat, like a cat, that she was Italian countess, and they were the outsiders. They were against them,
Mm-hmm.
and also because she gave him her lock of hair and she finds it there. So I thought,
Yes.
okay, perhaps they're just being rude, they're just being obnoxious. And I thought because
Mm-hmm.
he had her hair there and he was preserving it, that she, that she meant something to him. But then when he shows up later out on her balcony after they haven't seen each other for a while, and she asks him, "Where have you been?" And he says, "Well, I left because I wasn't sure if you love me." I thought, that sounds pretty lame. I just thought, really? Then I started thinking, okay, well, maybe he's deeply insecure, and maybe he got scared, which is possible. Sometimes people, they fall in love and they get so scared that they run. Certainly, when he was bringing up getting money from her to
Yes.
to bribe a corrupt doctor into writing a medical exemption so he wouldn't
Yes.
have to
Then I
go into the.
started to think, okay, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it certainly is not, and I imagine Visconti was intentionally misleading the audience, and so you're not quite sure until that
Mm-hmm.
that that scene. Which, and you're right, that scene at the end. I mean, he's drunk, he's with a prostitute, and he's laughing at her that he used her. And at the same time, I got the impression that he, like, hated himself. Like, he calls himself a
Yes.
coward. He talks about how, the fact that he didn't want to go into war because he felt that they wouldn't win, that they had no
Mm-hmm.
chance. And he even begins to cry because he felt that the future, he didn't like the passing of time, how things were now changing for him.
Yes.
But you don't really know what to believe about him. Is he really telling the truth? He seemed like he
Mm-hmm.
was, but I thought he wasn't as cut and dry as I thought during the film. I thought, oh, there is
Mm-hmm.
a real level of complexity and guilt within his character. I don't know what you thought, if that was your experience.
Yes, I agree. I mean, there was a scene where it's during the time that he's appeared on her balcony at their summer home, at their country home, and she ends up deciding to try and hide him in the granary.
Yeah,
And so she takes him there, and they have this conversation where he starts to talk about how war is really not, not
yes,
all it's cracked up to be, and people, end up with, no legs and with terrible injuries and disfigurements, and she's really, because she's very sensitive and protected, she's quite revolted by
yeah,
him describing that. But while he was talking that way, it gave me the sense that he had seen a lot of horrors. He,
oh
he
yeah,
maybe had PTSD to some extent, or
right,
had he, I mean, why do people join the military? To escape not great situations. I mean, at that time, I
yeah,
think there
sometimes,
was
yeah,
such a thing as maybe a military class where it was kind of preordained that you join the
right.
military, but he'd probably seen some pretty terrible things.
Yeah, I think so.
So,
And he suggested
yeah,
as much because he talks about, oh, you know, a lot of men, they like the uniforms, they like how it makes them
yes.
feel and look, but the other side is that we have to then go and fight. And I also like he makes a point which is true, when he's like, well, what's the point? Even if you win the war, what are you doing? You're just forcing the other side to think like you. So
Yes,
I
yes.
thought that
I
was
thought he
interesting.
had I thought he had some very interesting kind of philosophical things to say about war.
Yeah,
That whereas Livia it was just such a romanticist,
yeah, yeah,
and it's almost like he was the realist, and
yeah.
she was this romantic, deluded by her romantic ideas. And she was horrified when confronted with him towards the end of the film in his debauched state, but that's how he really was in many
Yeah,
ways.
yeah, no, it's well said. I totally agree. And another reason why I'm still thinking about his feelings towards her is, he wants money to not go into this war. So, but he puts himself in this position to go to where she's staying, where they have guard dogs and
Yeah.
soldiers on the look. So, like, which makes me wonder. I mean, was it purely money? Were there some feelings on his end that he also, just needed to see her and be with her? Because he put himself at such, unless perhaps he thought, well, that I'll take my chances, and that's better than going off to war. I don't
Right.
know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, or was he afraid of his feelings towards her too?
Could be, yeah.
Like it's, I mean, being in the military and which is so probably heavily coded, there's probably an incredible bro code,
Mm,
and and you don't want to be vulnerable at all.
right,
So, I mean, for
right.
him to have any soft, tender feelings towards her, I mean, that puts him in a very vulnerable position.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Which
I
really,
have to wonder.
yeah, which really, that when he says, I mean, even though I thought it made me laugh in a way, but I think there's truth to what I'm not sure if you really love me. I mean, it goes to that vulnerability of, like,
Yes.
the fear of being loved,
Hmm.
because then
Or
he's
was it
going
just
to,
manipulation?
yeah, you don't know, right? Yeah, I mean, he could have, it could be a totally calculated plan, which he
Hmm.
maybe hated himself for at the end. And even the fact that he tells her what's going on,
Yeah.
to I don't know if he realized that she had his letters, and then that she
Mm.
goes to the authorities and basically
Yes.
says, here's the evidence that he's basically a deserter, and he got money to give to the doctor, which was a crime. It was almost a
Mhm.
suicide in that sense. It was, but again, this is where the ambiguity comes in, because was he thinking that far ahead? He's drunk, I mean, hard to say. I shouldn't take credit for this, because this point, because I watched on the Criterion channel. I'm not sure if you watch any of the featurettes they have
Yes,
on
I
there.
did. They were so interesting.
Yeah, they were great. And one of the critics said, there was also the fact that she was always wearing veils.
Yes, the veils.
And I think that went down to the fact that she didn't want to be seen, for one thing, because she was, hiding and lying and secrets. But on the other hand, maybe she couldn't didn't want to look at herself because of the guilt
Yes.
involved.
And the veil spoke to how we delude ourselves,
Yeah, yeah,
how we delude ourselves versus seeing the reality,
yeah.
or seeing the reality in a tangential way.
You get this, you certainly see that she was aware of what she was doing was wrong, and that the guilt, and even
Yes.
when she gives the money that her cousin gave her for the soldiers to him,
Hmm.
she falls to pieces. I mean, she cannot help herself. I mean, she just, like, she put everything at such jeopardy, even Italy unifying, because
Yes.
because her cousin Roberto even says, like, we're all starving, so hang on to this money in case we need it later. And that was a huge risk. I mean, to put their
Hmm.
health and well-being at stake, just because
Yes.
this she could not let go of this passion. I mean, even at the end, when she basically has him killed, you see her calling out his name. I mean, she just
I
couldn't. She just could not let go of it. And I find that really interesting. I love stories about people who are just who are sort of under a spell in a sense, and kind
Mm,
of delude themselves, and have infatuations with, who have an idea of people that are not true, that just live in their head.
yes, yes.
I always find those kind of stories, so fascinating. Which I thought it worked so perfectly in this story, and I thought
Mhm.
that both Granger and Valli were phenomenal. I don't know how you felt about the two of them.
Well, I think given the style of film and given Visconti's apparent desire to deliberately make it melodramatic,
Yeah,
I think they did a great job. I mean, I have to admit I laughed in a couple of scenes.
right.
You know, the 2021 person watching
Yeah,
this, I mean, some of the scenes were kind of so over the top that I just spontaneously laughed.
the scene or
But
the acting.
the acting, yeah, because it was just so melodramatic. But once I learned more about Visconti and through reading a little bit about him and watching those featurettes, which were so interesting,
Yeah,
I realized that that Visconti was making very conscious choices to go in that direction. In a way, he was rebelling, I believe, against
yeah.
his earlier work, the neo-realist
In a
style, which
way,
was,
yeah. In a way, he
yeah.
was certainly doing things that were completely against it. I
Hmm.
know what you mean. It's, nowadays we don't see stories told like that, and therefore performances can never go so far. And so to us, it kind of reads false. Like, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was actually once talking to an actor about Brando in Streetcar Named Desire, and he thought, like, the Stella scene. He's like, "Oh, that's so phony." And I thought, are we at the point where we even think that's phony? I mean, we don't see those same
Hmm.
very heightened melodramas anymore. They just
Hmm.
are out of fashion. Everything is very, not that things are just small necessarily, but
Right.
people do not like to go outside certain means of expression.
Yes.
So for me, I certainly can see that the stories were very heightened, but I thought the performances were great. I thought Valli, I mean,
Yes.
even when she was trying to get him to not leave, to go to Verona, and she gives him the
Hmm.
money. Just when she was saying no and stopping him, you could just see the tears just pouring out of her. And that
Oh,
last
yes.
scene, especially when he was drunk, and he's just breaking her heart, destroying her, tearing the veil off her
Yes.
face. And wow, I mean, how she got there is a mystery. But I just thought, and as an actor, I mean, sometimes when the situations are so, when there's so much going on, then therefore, if you understand it, it's going to pour out of you. You
Yes.
know?
No, I definitely agree that
Yeah.
they were clearly both extremely committed.
Yeah. Oh
Like there
yeah.
was
Yeah.
there was 100% commitment, which I really enjoyed that, especially from Granger, because I had actually, well, I'd never seen either actor before perform, but I'd heard of Farley Granger, but I'd never seen him in a film. And I thought, especially as an American actor
Yeah.
coming into this type of film, I was really impressed with him.
Yeah, me
Um,
too. Me too. Because if you
yeah.
it's he I actually, watching this film got me interested more in him, and he has a memoir which I just picked up at the library, because
Oh,
his
okay.
his career was really interesting, because he was in these, like, I don't know how major they were at the time, but now we look at them as classics. He was in Rope by Hitchcock. He was in Strangers on a Train.
Right.
He was in They Live by Night, which is Nick Ray. So he was in, like, now these are, like, some of the biggest films from that period. And then he was in Senso, and I always liked him, but there was always an element of effort in his work. Like, he has
Ah.
the emotion, but he always sort of pushes, and I didn't feel he was doing that here. I
Hmm.
mean, sometimes when it's subtitled, it can be a little hard to tell because you're also reading. But
Yes.
that last scene particularly, I didn't feel he was pushing. I thought it was very organic. you
I
know.
agree. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I think again, given the style of the film, given what Visconti was trying to achieve, I thought they were both incredible.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, and
absolutely.
I'm curious to see Alida Valli and other things. Have you seen her in
Yeah,
anything else?
I've only seen her in the she, because in Hollywood they were trying to make her out to be like the next Greta Garbo. So
Uh,
she was in the Paradine case, which was that was Hitchcock and Gregory Peck,
right.
which didn't do well. And then she was in The Third Man. She was in The Third
Oh,
Man,
really? Okay.
which is a British film, but I think it was an American co-production. So, but she, after this film, she sort of became obscure for quite a while, and then in the '70s, she was in Suspiria, the horror film, the Argento film. She was in one of Bertolucci's films, but I don't know her work too well.
Okay.
But she was really good in the other films I saw. But her and Farley Granger, it's interesting. They both were similar in the sense that they found that Hollywood was sort of choking them and putting them under these
Mm,
contracts. And as you know, back then actors often were signed to like 7 picture deals, and they didn't have the
yes.
freedom that they do now. And they both were like, no, nah, and they got they just wanted to get out of it. And actually, Farley Granger, after this film, I think he was in a couple of more movies, and then his entire career he was either on stage or in television. And that's it for a movie star to basically walk away because he didn't like doing things he didn't want to do. I thought, and she did
Interesting.
the same thing, which
Hmm.
was really fascinating. But there's certainly people that I think more people should look at because they're really interesting and a good. I don't know a lot about them, but just some of their choices of how they handle their careers
Hmm.
pretty fascinating. Did
Hmm.
any of the trivia on this film in those little featurettes interest you? There are some interesting things that I didn't know about who they wanted to cast originally.
Yes, yes. Yeah, well, they wanted to cast Brando
Yeah, speaking of
and
Brando, yeah,
Ingmar Bergman.
yeah, that's right.
And I
Ingrid
thought that
Bergman,
was
yeah.
interesting. I guess it sounds like Roberto Rossellini, who
Mm,
was married to Ingrid Bergman at the time, he was quite controlling and
yeah.
apparently wouldn't allow her to work on that film, which is, she would have been amazing in it.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think Brando would have as well, but I think it worked out really well with these two. It would have been certainly interesting, and that they also consciously has him as a younger man, and
Yes.
Granger is younger than Alida Valli, and Brando I think was like a decade younger than Ingrid Bergman.
Oh,
So there was a
okay.
conscious choice to make her more of a mature woman because as they said in the featurette, in the novella, she's a more innocent woman.
Ah,
And
okay.
and she didn't, and in the book, she not even too interested in the politics of the time. But I think the fact that they made her a more older, mature woman is why she was more conscious of what she was doing, and that's where the guilt and fed in. And
Ah,
I think that worked better. I think that was a good idea.
I think it made, yeah, it sounds like it would make a more interesting film because that's
Yeah,
another layer to the dynamic between the two of them. Because when when France towards the end kind of turns on Livia, I mean, he even insults her for her age,
yes, that's right. He
you
does.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, which I thought, man, that's pretty low.
Oh yeah. No, he's nasty. He's so
Yeah.
nasty in that last scene. I mean, I was
Yes.
like, he just I'm not surprised she just wanted him dead. I think I would have felt the same way. I mean, she just wow. But you're right. I mean, it's that operatic. It's so operatic. And I
Mhm.
just read earlier this was never adapted into an opera, and I'm surprised because it seems like something they could have easily adapted. Uh, uh,
Definitely. They could probably just have overdubbed people singing those lines and it
yeah, I
would have
think
been an
so.
opera.
Yeah, no, definitely. It would certainly work, but who knows?
Even some
Perhaps.
of the staging, like the scenes, the way the scenes were set up and the lighting, I found the lighting extremely dramatic,
Yeah.
like you would get on a theater stage and in particular an opera.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
this was one of the first films that they shot in Technicolor, which
oh,
in
yes,
in
yes.
in in Hollywood that was becoming really, really major because, they were competing with television. So they're like,
Yes.
let's bring in color. It's very much like now, they're competing with streaming services. So they go all out with Marvel and what can you not get at home? Well, you can't get color.
Yes.
But for this film, it really worked. I mean, they look like oil paintings. And I think in the
Yes.
featurettes, they talk about how he intentionally went and looked at 19th century, like the oil paintings during that era of
Yes.
people
Yes.
painting about the passage of time and the unification of Italy. And I thought it just looks breathtaking. It was beautifully shot.
Yes, that was really interesting. And the other thing that I found really fascinating in the featurettes were the discussion of how of Visconti's connection to opera.
Yes, I
And
still have to see that one because I
it's
didn't watch it
really
yet.
interesting, yeah.
Yeah,
And so, because I was reading the synopsis of Il Trovatore, trying to understand, okay, why? I mean, I assumed that was chosen deliberately as an opera.
right.
So I thought, okay, well, why? So I was reading the synopsis, and apparently it's widely known to be one of the craziest, most convoluted plots in all of opera.
Oh, I didn't
So
know
I'm
that.
apparently, yeah. So I'm trying to make sense out of this synopsis. It's like, okay, I give up because it was just so crazy and detailed. But in this featurette, they talk about how I guess one of the main character in Il Trovatore is also fighting kind of a just fight against a count or somebody who has power. So it kind of mirrors
Yeah,
what's happening in Italy at the time. So
right.
and
Oh, I
and
see.
Verdi was I mean he was a very prolific opera composer, but he, according to these folks in this featurette, he never made an unpolitical opera. They were always coded very politically about what was happening in Italy at the time.
Oh, okay.
So,
I didn't
so
know that.
Visconti apparently knew opera intimately. Like you said, he was an opera director, but he would have grown, being of a noble family, he would have
Yeah,
grown up hearing opera all the time, going to La Scala
yeah,
and to all the opera houses. And I think his parents were big patrons of the opera.
yeah. Huge.
So for him, opera was like, just kind of his daily. I think one of the people in the featurette said it was like his daily bread.
Yeah,
So that was really interesting to me. So it made me have the idea that for Visconti, that's just part of um, his alphabet. When it comes to making a film, he's always going to have
yeah.
something to do with opera.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, for sure. And I think it was also it also worked so well because everyone meets at the opera, which is so like
Yes,
the whole thing wouldn't have happened if they hadn't been there. Because
yes.
the fight starts at the opera, she meets him at the opera. So without, in other words, it was born out of the opera. So
Yes,
uh,
that's probably where, yeah, where people did meet. They connected with each other, they
probably, yeah,
socialized.
yeah.
That was like the heartbeat of the town probably.
Yeah, no, I think so. I was wondering about that too. I was like, I wonder why, because they had to close that theater for that opera house for like 2 or 3 weeks or something. So I thought,
Yes.
why? I
Yeah.
wonder why he insisted on that because I imagine all those extras and shooting it. I mean,
Huge.
obviously it adds to the story, but I wonder, okay, how else could these meetings have happened? But
Hmm.
he obviously felt strongly about it, and clearly it worked so well. Even with the protesting, when they're all throwing the papers from the boxes, which they're all
Yes.
like green, white, red, the Italian flag,
Yes.
throwing it at
Yeah.
the soldiers. It's just visually works so well to the story and emotionally speaking as well.
Hmm.
I loved it. So I'm
Yeah,
certainly
that
gonna
was a beautiful beginning
yeah,
sequence.
yeah, no, it was really, really breathtaking. I mean, this is right up Visconti's alley, and he certainly revisited these kind of people in films after this, like Death in Venice and The
Hmm.
Leopard and Conversation Piece, which I reviewed, and Boccaccio 70. I mean, he knew these people. He was part of these people, right? So it's is right up his alley, and I don't think anyone could do it better. I mean, he just
Well,
totally
so it
understood it.
makes me think that that's why he turned away from neorealism, because he maybe was thinking, well, I have so much inside knowledge of this class of people,
Yeah.
and I can say what I want to say by using them. And you got the feeling that he, even though he was from that class, he was very critical of them, because
Oh
he
yeah, yeah. You
was
can
like
always see that.
a red communist, right? Or
Yeah.
what was his nickname? Something like the
Oh,
red
yeah. Well,
the,
and that was part
the
of the
red
reason.
count or something.
Yeah, the red count, and that was a big part of the reason why Brando didn't do it, because the
Right.
blacklisting in Hollywood, the McCarthyism at that time, they thought, you're going to go work with a communist in Italy, like it's not going to look good in 1950s America.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So that was a big part of the reason why he didn't want to jeopardize his career, I imagine. But yeah, that's what's so interesting about him, is that he was a communist, but he was also part of this family that goes back, centuries, this noble family. But some people don't feel he necessarily was a communist. It was just that he believed in the principles, and he hated the Nazis and the fascists. So he just
Yes.
had to go with a party that was fighting it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
he was hiding communists in his villas, and he was interrogated by the Nazis. And apparently,
Oh,
I do
really?
believe they were going to put him to death, and he somehow got out of it. I'd have to look up the details. I've
Oh,
been trying to
wow.
find like a biography on him, and there are some, but like in Italy, that I don't believe have been translated,
Okay.
because he's just someone full of so many contradictions, and
Yes.
he was also gay at a time when you couldn't come out, and
Yes.
had a, as
Hmm.
they said in some of those featurettes, a violent, abusive temper, which really was some of the things that they were saying. I just thought, oh God, like he today he'd be someone probably all over the media as not someone that anyone would want to work with. But
Yes.
people put up with that back then, and they some of the filmmakers who later became filmmakers, who were the assistant directors on that, like Francesco Rossi, as he
Yes.
talks about it with just an acceptance, and but we just obviously have more consciousness about, we're starting to anyways.
I wonder if Italy, well, when did Visconti die?
He died in 76. He's been dead for a
Oh,
while. Yeah.
that's right. So maybe at that time there was still enough of a class system that people just thought, oh, well, if Count Visconti says jump, I'm going to jump.
It
Maybe
could
he got
be.
away with it because of his class.
Yeah, it's strongly, it's a strong possibility. But yeah, I mean, I believe Helmut Berger, who was one of his lovers and was the star of
Mhm.
some of his movies, said like, because he would stay with him, and some of the servants weren't even allowed to talk, and stuff like
Oh my
that. And
God.
but it very much was just what it was when he was a kid. Okay, like these are the servants who can talk, these are the ones who can't, and he just followed within the tradition. But that's what makes it such an interesting contradiction, because he believes in these communist principles, but yet he has servants and he tells them that they can't talk. It just doesn't make any sense. So thanks so much, Joanna. I really appreciate that you took the time to come out, and you watched the film twice and took notes. I really appreciate that. So
Well, it's funny that after the first watching, I thought, "Oh my God, like
yeah,
this film, there's so much in it." And so I waited a couple of days, and I had to watch it again in two or three parts, because there's only so much you can take at one time.
yeah, yeah. Well, this is a film that demands that, particularly if you're going to talk
Yes.
about it at this length, because as you said, there's so much to it. So
Yes.
I can totally I understand that, but I
But
again
it
I sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, but you know what? It was very rewarding
Oh, for
because,
sure.
yeah, it led me to learn a lot more about Visconti and kind of review my history, my European history, and and I love learning about those kind of things. So it was really a lot of fun.
Great. No, I'm glad to hear that. Well, please come again, and
Oh,
Where,
please, anytime.
oh, great. And I know that I have you on Instagram, and do you what are your social media handles if people want to check out what you're working on as an actress or anything else?
Sure. So on Instagram, I'm Stephen Joanne 60.
Okay.
And yeah, and I'm on Facebook as well. I'm not on Twitter, so
Okay, great. So I'll leave the link in the description box if people want to follow what Joanne is up to as an actress. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. If you are currently listening to this right now on the audio version of the podcast, there are a lot more episodes on the YouTube channel. So if you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel to hear and or see a lot more at youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. I am also on Patreon. For those of you who don't know what Patreon is, it is an exclusive membership where creators such as myself create bonus content at a monthly subscription fee, which is very reasonable. Then there are different tiers that you can decide on. All of the tiers are based on polls that I put out at the beginning of every single month. I do performance reviews, noir or not. If you're into film noir, I have a Hitchcock tier and another cinephile tier, which is a general movie buff review, which includes a share of Italian film content as well. So you can vote on the polls, and therefore you are very much involved in the decision making of what I do on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies if you want to become a member. And lastly, if this is your first time on my channel, please consider subscribing as I'm trying to monetize. Just press the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head right here to your top left. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release a new video or when I go live. Thank you so much, folks. I will see you in the next episode.